Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KON Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. Just a couple of days left of the Joe Miller Show. We're going to make it good. We're going to talk today a little bit about what I mentioned earlier last hour, how there's an increasing divide in this country on different perspectives of government, different perspectives of politics, religion. We put up a story that went fairly viral the other day, talking about the most godless city in America. Of course, Alaska's in the top 3 or 4 states as far as religiosity goes, but the top community is Portland, Oregon. It's number 1 on the list with the most religiously unaffiliated residents at 42%. That's according to Public Religion and Research Institute's America Values Atlas. It was a survey of 50,000 people. Close behind it is Seattle and San Francisco. They're tied in second place. But here's the interesting aspect of this. In other areas of the country, it's the polar opposite. And this kind of gets to what I was saying earlier, that Americans are increasingly growing in their divide on so many different fronts. It's an increasing polarization, really a difference in worldview. For example, in Nashville, guess what the religiously unaffiliated number is? 15%, 1/3 of what you see in Portland. Charlotte, North Carolina, similar at 17%. Dallas, Atlanta, Orlando, Pittsburgh, they're all at 18%. And again, we aren't suggesting that religiously unaffiliated mean they're atheists or agnostics, or that necessarily they're at polar opposites on moral views, but it is one indicator. And it's creating issues because, you have different expectations of morality. And a lot of people look at law, for example, and they say, okay, you can't legislate morality. Well, law is telling you what's right and wrong. So it's by definition legislating morality. And you have these perspectives that are just so different as to what's right and wrong. I mean, for example, even here in Alaska, we've got this ongoing debate in Anchorage as to whether or not we should celebrate the diversity of men dressed as women, the transgendered community. We've had the ongoing debate for years now about homosexuality, homosexual marriage, that type of thing. We have some now that believe it is right to compel private businesses to force them to allow men dressed as women to go to little girls' restrooms or vice versa. In other words, basically tearing down the differences in gender, and also, I think, putting folk at risk. And it's leading to a real conflict, and it is something that our founders didn't exactly expect as far as the type of conflict right now, but they expected that we would not be perfectly homogeneous. And in fact, the 13 states, when the Union was formed, weren't homogeneous. And we've talked about this before on the show. I mean, you had the Catholic Maryland, the Catholics in Maryland. You had the Protestants in Connecticut. I mean, you had the convicts in Georgia. I mean, you had this mosaic of folk with different perspectives, different views, different religious perspectives that came together. But their expectation was that in each of these states, they'd be able to express their political will, that the states would have the power. I mean, under the 9th and 10th Amendments, the federal government had very restricted, restrained powers. The states could handle most everything else. So even at the beginning of this country, a lot of folk don't know this, most of the colonies or most of the original states had state-established churches. Now, it's not lawful now because of the application of the Bill of Rights to the states. But at the beginning of the country, at the time that the Constitution was ratified, most of the states had state-established churches. And I'm not making a call to go back to that, but what I'm trying to tell you is that the state system, the federal system, was designed to ensure that states had a breadth of action that could allow comfort for their people that are there to basically govern their lives as they saw fit. And so, unlike today, where you've got this kind of one-size-fits-all type approach, and I've talked about that as a political candidate when I've opposed, for example, the federal government solutions that supposedly apply to everyone, including Alaska. I pushed back against that, especially on education. But the modern leftists, the socialists, the big government folk, they're very intent on wanting to have this one-size-fits-all. They see, the federal system as being basically the United States federal government being in charge of everything and mandating basically a homogeneous system on everybody else. That wasn't the intent. And when you do something like that, especially with this diversity that's developed in this country, the religious diversity, ideological diversity, political diversity, it's a recipe for disaster because it creates basically a need for a pressure relief valve. It produces political instability. It creates all sorts of problems. And so what's the solution? Well, obviously, it's to get back to what the founders intended. That's the states' rights model. It's something that does provide the methodology by which this country stays unified. People have their outlets. They can go to the state that best addresses what they see as being right for government, and it's the solution. But the fascists and the people that want to impose their will on others, they want the one-size-fits-all. We all need to push against this, whether you're left or right. The fact of it is, resolve differences at the state level, of course, within the parameters of the U.S. Constitution, and let's keep things together and politically stable. Now, here's yet another example of how things are kind of spinning apart, if you will. Arizona, you might have heard about this, made national news. We just put up an article about this yesterday or the day before. One of the largest city councils in the United States, at least representing the largest number of people, City Council Phoenix, it was decided that a satanic group would open the city council meeting in prayer. So they're praying to Lucifer, the author of evil, at least according to Western thought, traditional Western thought, and that's how they're opening that city council. That is absolutely moronic, folks. This concept that the First Amendment compels that, which is apparently what motivated the city council in Phoenix to allow it. Now, if a state wants that, I mean, sure, go ahead, let them go forward on that, and then let them suffer whatever consequences they suffer from it. But I can tell you, I mean, I've got in-laws and kids and everything else down in Phoenix. The overall perspective in Phoenix is not that Satanism is good, and that, in fact, the city council should open their city council meeting with prayer to Satan or Lucifer. Absolutely crazy. Take a look at that article, but it's reflective, again, of the type of split that I referred to before as far as the difference in religious opinion goes. This is kind of distantly related to this whole concept, the religiously unaffiliated. Donald Trump in the news, and this came at the most inopportune time because it was just a day before the caucuses. The story broke on Sunday. It happened on Sunday. Donald, of course, trying to build up his evangelical support in Iowa, attended church on Sunday and talks about his religious attendance and says that he loves his church and everything else. And I'm not going to judge that by any means, but he didn't know the difference between an offering plate and a communion plate. And as it was being passed by, it happened to be the communion plate. He was digging in his wallet for some bills. And, of course, that has made waves. I don't know whether it made the difference in the caucuses or not, but things like that obviously are not helping him with the evangelical support base. Again, I'm telling you, don't count Trump out. We've had a number of presidents who came in second in Iowa that went on to win the nomination. It's happened more often than not, actually, and it does look like Trump's running pretty strong in New Hampshire. So it just a curiosity. Another area, though, of divide in the country, not just religiously unaffiliated or affiliated, is on the whole drug thing. And there has been marching forward a resurgence of states' rights on that issue. A number of states have, of course, legalized drug use, contrary, of course, to federal law. It looks like the feds mostly are ignoring those states and allowing, to some exceptions, allowing those laws to take effect. But it's interesting. News came out just a couple of days ago that there are significant adverse impacts with regular marijuana usage. We've talked before on this program about the issue of paranoia, schizophrenia, the other mental-related conditions that are correlated with regular marijuana use. But it now appears that marijuana is proven to affect verbal memory. The ability to remember certain words, a new study finds, is significantly impacted by regular use. In fact, every 5 years of marijuana use, researchers found that on average, one or two people remembered one word fewer from a list of 15 words. So, long-term pot user, 20 years pot user, out of 15 words, you're going to forget about a third of them. And, yeah, that's kind of a rough and tumble way to give analysis of the impact. But if you're losing a third of your verbal capacity after, 15, 20 years of drug use, it's something that probably ought to be considered before you decide that you're going to become a regular user. Certainly something to consider before you start use alone. Take a look at that story. We have that up at joemiller.us. We're going to talk next segment a little bit about some of the other issues that are facing the country, kind of the wake of the caucuses in Iowa, what we have to look forward to in New Hampshire, as well as what's going on with Hillary Clinton. U.S. spies are horrified by the email scandal. It's not just words. It's not just a political hit. There's real substance adverse to American national security as a result of what Hillary did. Stay with us, The Joe Miller Show. Be right back after this.